So it has occurred to me that since I've been exploring these different methods of building space-time travel machines, that I should perhaps say something about why one would want to build a space-time travel machine, which presupposes that there's a kind of rationale, or that a space-time travel machine has some purpose or function. And the first space-time experiment that I created, which was it took the form of a advertisement for. It wasn't really in any profound sense a time travel machine. It was. I would say more imaginative space travel machine. And what made it science fiction-like was the idea that it could project itself forward in the same way that a cinematic projector projects light onto a screen. And I suppose what made it science fiction-like was not that it could do this projection, but that what it was projecting was its own matter in the form of light. So a kind of conversion of itself and its energies into a form of light that, and therefore being light, it had the capacity to travel at a certain speed, in fact, an inevitability of such travel, and that it could direct this light wherever it saw fit. So, but the telos, the function of this particular space travel device, was largely belonged to entertainment or to leisure. It was the advertisement professed to be for a kind of device that could take you on a journey, the same way that you would take a cruise on a cruise ship, or that you would travel, on a safari in some exotic locale in Africa or perhaps Asia, and in that sense that it was the futuristic update of an idea of the vacation. So one works hard in life, and then one deserves some time off, and the way that one of the ways that capitalism rewards us, for sustaining it and its endeavors, is by giving us, some time off and letting us explore the world. So this was the professed utility of this vehicle that I had constructed as an advertisement in it was 1978, I believe. And we still, you see advertisements for these kind of escapist journeys, today, and less so with COVID, but certainly, all of these places that one can go to for the purpose of leisure, and often, there are these enclosed sort of vacation villages that, like Club Med or places like this, where you have the enticement of seeing this exotic location, but then you're assured that you can do so within the safety and comfort of this, familiar type of environment in which all of your needs are met, from your need for psychological security behind these closed gates or in these, isolated places, to your, needs for to indulge your senses with the delights of cuisines and cuisines and comforts that in some ways are exotic and extraordinary, but in other ways are quite familiar and safe. So this space-time travel advertisement, played into that idea. Talked about these spacecraft being safe from pirates. It talked about this form of travel. Is it these anxieties that being displaced from familiar matter into the matter of light might give rise to? Is this safe? It's safe, and all of these sort of ideas. So today I want to look at a very different kind of rationale for developing and utilizing space-time travel devices and what they can show us about our world and both its past and its potential futures. And I want to do that by looking at a specific series of events around where the last space-time travel device led us, which was, if you recall, it led us to the performance of Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock, specifically the performance of the Star-Spangled Banner. And it did this on yesterday's date, the 5th of July, right, following the celebration and the fireworks. Here on the Navajo Nation, we hear a lot of fireworks, and certainly the performance of the Star-Spangled Banner raises a lot of historical material that is worthy of investigation. And since that's where our particular space-time travel machine brought us, I want to emphasize, because I've been talking about this, that performance art and the idea of especially performance art as non-mimetic performativity, the kind of work that I had discussed Nellie Bly, I had discussed Alan Capro's Happenings, but especially this kind of radical departure from theatricalized drama and mimetic representation. Specifically, this type of work, I have been arguing, can act as a form of knowledge investigation, experimental in the sense that you actually find something out with your work, and that this seeing with one's own eyes the world is a form of investigation and knowledge that doesn't belong to the sphere of science, but that shares in a certain way some of its principles of investigation, and its understanding of the utility of primary research, and primary research within I would say this expanding compass, right? Of so that the experiment isn't never limited. I did an experiment yesterday, but I'm not going to leave it at that. You take the results of your experiment and you learn from them, and you plug them back in, and that gives you another value or coordinate with which the further voyage can continue, or the further research can continue. So yesterday we were led to the highly charged synergistic collision with Jimi Hendrix playing the Star-Spangled Banner, and this following the 4th of July. And anyone who lives here in the United States will be aware of that there has been like a contention over the Star-Spangled Banner, and and how one is supposed to perform in relationship to it, and this is political. So, the energies that I've been exerting on talking about performativity and performance artwork and its politicization and its ability to find knowledge, but also to do work to change the world, isn't perhaps, in a certain way, unlike some of the arguments made for space travel, right? Although these arguments made for space travel are largely made in colonialist terms that come from, what's sometimes historically called the age of discovery, right? The late 14th century through the 17th century, in which colonizers, who called themselves explorers of the world, and this was largely like by ship and sea travel in that period, but the dream has become that these spacecraft are like like ships of the future, right? And even in some science fiction, like specifically Star Trek, that long introduction really plays into this sort of age of discovery idea that let's see, how does it go? These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise, whose 5-year mission is to explore, etc., etc. I can't remember all of it. To boldly go, like they split the infinitive, right? To boldly go, and then it's patriarchy. It's like gendered, right? Where no man has gone before. Well, obviously, and then they encounter all of these like aliens, right? So, like, in what sense did no one go there before? Only in the sense that they're stand-ins for these white European explorers from the age of discovery, right? Like so they're the Drakes and they're the Walter Raleighs, and they're the Christopher Columbuses, and they're the Amerigo Vespuccios, or what's his name? Anyway, they're all of these European, Italian, and non-Italian explorers, and British explorers, and their assumptions, at least in the intro, although I will admit that the series itself goes beyond that message and that sort of colonialist idea, and explores other aspects of the human condition and social characteristics in our time, but the introduction basically does that. So I'll look at briefly some of the things that NASA says about justifying its deployment of space travel, and then I'll talk about the ways that my space-time travel machines and experiments are in some ways critiques of those colonialist ideas and those exploratory ideas, and in some ways they radicalize aspects of a kind of scientific idea of human knowledge and the potential for change. So we'll begin with that. All right, so before we begin exploring the idea, I like that the verb exploring circles back on itself, and almost ironically hints at certain ideas. Before we begin doing that, in relationship to the way that NASA's justification for space travel and the particularly the exorbitant amount of money that goes into the development of this particular technology is justified, in large part based upon deployment of the evolution of an ideology that grows out of the age of discovery and colonialism. And it certainly isn't limited to NASA. I mean, people like Elon Musk, reiterate these arguments, ad nauseum, and it's very familiar and has been familiar, for a long time. But even the staging of the deployment of U.S. flags on the moon and these sorts of things are very reminiscent of the idea of claiming territory in the name of this flag. And if one has a flag and one plants it, then it's yours. These ideas are familiar. So before we do that, I want to go back to the way that we built a space-time travel machine yesterday, and I want to reiterate that and use whatever the results of that that reiteration is, as a kind of opening to the work that we perform today, and maybe hopefully to work in a particular direction. So if you recall, what I had done was I had built this space-time travel machine out of a phrase that I found in a lecture given by a quantum mechanic, and that phrase was, "The birds are quick to leave Hamburg in winter." And I had built this space-time travel device, and then we had returned to the set of views of these particular space-time travel devices, and I had collected these numbers here, 1, 5, and 4, and then it's off the screen now, but the other set of numbers were no views, and then 2. So I had used that as 2. That led us to another collection of numbers that I had, which are the numbers that correspond to my arrangement of musical albums on my iTunes list, and then 154 had led us to Jimi Hendrix live at Woodstock, hence the image of Hendrix here in this particular one. Actually, that's incorrect. I had already put the image of Hendrix before we had received the number 154. So this image of Hendrix preceded our space-time travel experiment, hinting again at like the profound synergy there. And then, so I had made another one, and this one here, and brought the results of this space-time travel experiment into the next piece, in which we actually took a listen to a version of Hendrix's performance of the Star Spangled Banner. Now, you can't put the Star Spangled Banner as Hendrix plays it up on YouTube, because Warner Brothers has copyright authority over this particular piece, and ownership rights, in spite of the fact that, well, let's not get into all of that here, but the relationship between Warner Brothers as a company and Jimi Hendrix is pretty complicated in and of itself. But in any case, the political act that Hendrix performed at Woodstock, you can't reproduce, even though there are a number of different arguments that could be made that this belongs to a certain category of public domain by virtue of its historical significance, when it was played, and various other rationale. But so I had to alter that particular piece, and I did so profoundly, and in some ways to the point of being unrecognizable, because I knew that I had to fool the AI that recognizes the piece, and so I built into it a number of different variations in time and in tone, and that would make it difficult for the device that does the recognizing for these music ownership authorities to claim rights to this material. And ultimately, like, the reason that they want to claim rights to the material is because we exist under capitalism and they want to make money. So that's why one of the reasons that we have radical copyright infringement theater as part of our projects is to play with these ideas and to try to discuss them and to change and challenge them into the degree that we can. And also in some ways I don't simply inherently disregard ownership rights. If an artist creates a work, then the proceeds of that work should go to the artist. Well, look at Vincent van Gogh, right? So he created all of this amazing work and made almost nothing in his lifetime and lived in abject poverty. I mean, the same could be said about someone like Joseph Cornell, the man of the boxes, right? Didn't particularly live a life that benefited from the economic and monetary exchanges of his work. But then, once these great artists die, then their work suddenly becomes valuable and is sold and traded and profited on by large companies and museums and other art collectors and dealers and things like that. So that's what I have problems with. If Hendrix were alive, Hendrix could certainly be making the money from his performance in Woodstock those many years ago. But in any case, that particular piece, right, led us to today's work, which is reinvestigating and following up and plugging these values back in regarding this particular space-time travel experiment. It led us to the performance of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock, and now I want to explore some of the social and political implications of that work that Hendrix did, because I want to call it work, not just play. And just as a precursor, there's a lot going on in Hendrix's deployment of that particular piece, right? He's performing it while we're still engaged in the Vietnam War. There's a section of it in which he breaks out into taps. The noise and the distortion itself is a social critique, as he's very much aware. The comments that he makes on the Dick Cavett show in discussing the Star-Spangled Banner reiterate the idea, and he also reiterates the idea on several occasions before performing his work, that feedback and noise are a form of social commentary. And he talks about sounds and their connection to harmonies of human consciousness, but also the violence. There's another song called Machine Gun in which he explicitly draws out the cry of the guitar as both the noise of the machine gun, and he refers to it as something. These bullets are something that you hear both in the inner cities and in Vietnam, and so he's aware that the exploitation of human life and the destruction of human life is being engaged both on this colonialist theater outside of the United States and internally to the United States, in these struggles that people are engaging in the continuing efforts of those who struggle for civil rights for people of color and people that are otherwise oppressed and suppressed in the inner cities and elsewhere. So anyway, Hendrix is very much aware of all of this, and it's something that I want to explore today because it certainly bears upon a number of the different theaters that we're working with, including radical copyright infringement theater, but also radical flag recovery theater. I've said on more than one occasion that neo-fascism in the United States and nationalism and white nationalism and white supremacist ideologies are very good at appropriating the significance of the American flag and using it. We looked at, for example, the way that in rallies that support the state of Israel, and I've used the word before, and I've talked about the way that it is problematic, and I've also refused to apologize for it. The state of Israel and their attempts to not only control but potentially eliminate the population of Palestinians in the territory of Israel, which is, and I repeat, the term will come under criticism, but is a form of genocide. We see in the support for the state of Israel in rallies that not only is the Israeli flag raised, but the U.S. flag is raised. And then the anti-colonialist supporters of the Palestinians who are denied resources, who are denied the rights of territory and travel, who are denied basic human rights and freedoms. We see in images of the protests that the supporters of these groups make very few examples of, if any, of the American flag, because the American flag is recognized as a colonialist symbol. Now, Hendrix was really an interesting political artist because in his work, not only did he, often drape himself in the flag, but he performed the Star-Spangled Banner. He was an early example of our theater, of the radical U.S. flag recovery theater, as certain other largely musical performers of the 1960s, were as well, including the Jefferson Airplane and certain depictions of flags, and this idea that the flag, in its profound sense, represented American ideals of democracy and freedom, rather than of colonialism, and so these ideas and other ideas, like from the Airplane, Volunteers of America, was a largely socially radical projection of the idea of work, art as work. And so anyway, all of these issues certainly belong to the kinds of work that I do, and that belong to these multiple theaters that we want to look at. And as I said, I'm going to start simply by seeing what the same form of space-time travel device leads us to today. So these are the new numbers on my views, and you'll recall that the numbers of the views led us to the locus the space-time locus of our discussion, which is Jimi Hendrix performance of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock. So let's see what the numbers give us today. So the first two numbers are 2 and 1. So I'm going to collect those together, and that collection we're going to call 21. And then the next number is 5. So I'm going to separate that number and collect it in and of itself as the number 5. And the 21 I'm going to use in the same way that I used before. I'm going to assign these numbers to a different collection, which is my set of music in iTunes. So let's see what we get. So 21 will be the number, 21 will be the number of the list, and 5 will be the number of the tune. All right, so we'll have to count these out because they're less than 40. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Interesting. The best of Bach. So 21 and 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, interesting. So the Brandenburg Concerto number 1, F major. All right, so it may not appear as obvious, but it certainly is the case. Music is always political. If we look up the Brandenburg Concerto, it becomes, in some way more obvious. This is Bach's dedication. I'm looking at the Wikipedia site for the Brandenburg's entry, the Brandenburg Concerto's entry, and this is what Bach says about the Brandenburg Concerto in his dedication. And this dedication is dated the 24th of March, 1721. So this piece and this letter fall within the period described that I've been describing as the Age of Discovery, which is going to be the basis. This ideology is going to be the basis for the way we read NASA's justification for space travel, and the way that I take that justification and demonstrate that my rationale for space-time travel experiments are in some ways critiques of that ideology, and in some ways transgress the authority that allows and perpetuates that ideology. So we have that particular piece of the Brandenburg Concerto in the background, and then this is a description that Bach made in this letter. As I had the good fortune a few years ago to be heard by your Royal Highness, at your Royal Highness's commands, and as I noticed then that your Highness took some pleasure in the little talents which heaven has given me for music, and as in taking leave of your Highness deigned to honor me with the command to send your Highness some pieces of my composition, I have, in accordance with your Highness's most gracious orders, taken the liberty of rendering my most humble duty to your Royal Highness with the present concertos, which I have adapted to several instruments, begging your Highness most humbly not to judge their imperfection with the rigor of the discriminating and sensitive taste which everyone knows him to have for musical works, but rather to take into benign consideration the profound respect and the most humble obedience with which I thus attempt to show him. The really interesting thing about the letter is the ingratiating form that it takes. We think of the ideas of like human hierarchy in the social order as in some ways being, a function of this this period and this age, that we have moved beyond, but in many ways, we haven't at all. One of the indignations that ex-President Trump continually, expressed was that, people didn't show him the proper respect. He clearly regards himself as a superior form of human being, that these kinds of dignities and ingratiating behaviors, that people should display to him, right? And part of the critiques that he made of individuals who protested the force and violence used, by the police against African Americans and other people of color in Black Lives Matter movement and elsewhere, was that they were not showing respect. So there's all of this like discourse around like disrespecting the flag, right, and disrespecting him. And this all seemed like bizarre and ranting and raving, but somewhat understandable if you realize that his understanding of self belongs to this period of a hierarchization of human value, in which by virtue of the money that he holds, he regards himself as the top of this great chain of being, and has a kind of highness, and that the social order should recognize this highness, even though, of course, it's for us it's archaic and outdated. And here's another attempt to show him, right? So anyway, that's one thing, and then clearly this is a different kind of statement than Hendrix would make about what he's doing with his work. Bach is a servant of empire and an emperor, a servant of this hierarchy in this sense, and whatever else he's doing with the spirituality of the work, he is framing it in terms of this social order that very much, is a model of a universe, based on human social order and a kind of priority of these hierarchies. And then the other thing about this piece that's interesting, if I can get to it. Oh, is this right here. A Carl Richter recording was sent into space in 1977 on the Voyager Golden Record. And we know that a lot of other things were sent on this record, right? So this is the time capsule record that was sent into outer space. And this is particularly this is really interesting, right? So the idea that the Voyager Golden Records, in some ways it brings me back to Harry Smith, who we talked about in terms of anthologies and collecting, because this idea is so absurd. The idea that you would send phonograph records into space, hoping that there are alien beings that had developed a similar technology to phonographs, when we, even today, right? So this was done in 1977, and even on Earth in 2021, there are very few people that have access to phonograph records and record players, vinyl record players anymore. So even in our world, this technology, for practical purposes, other than if you're a DJ scratcher, doesn't exist anymore. So the idea that that we would have sent this technology into space in hopes that some extraterrestrial life form would have developed the exact technological means of replaying recorded messages that we developed and that lasted for a period of roughly 100 years, is so absurd that it lends itself to a kind of existential comedy. So just in case anyone objects to the argument that that it is in fact ridiculous to imagine that an extraterrestrial being could have played these recordings, because in fact there were instructions provided on the record giving detailed description of how to play the record. I just want to the viewer to take a look at this description, the instructions on the outside of the record, and try to imagine that you're receiving this information on a circular disc. Why is this necessarily a description of a way of conceiving technology, as opposed to this image, which is descriptive of a phenomenon of our world? I mean, presumably to an alien consciousness, this image that you're looking at right now could be a kind of manual and description of how to perform things in the physical world, as much as this could. I mean, what if the aliens look more like this than they look like this? There's an interesting anecdote about these figures as well. That's also part of this age of discovery in a certain weird way. That originally the drawing for the male figure had an afro, and but that was changed. Someone must have objected, because things don't get changed unless there's input, and that he was Europeanized. I don't know why, to suit perhaps the demographics of NASA at the time. In any case, here's an explanation for the diagram explaining how to utilize the human technology of the recording, which I believe is copper with perhaps some other externalized metal alloy, maybe even gold, as in the Golden Voyager. So this image explains how what actually exists on the disc is a set of instructions. And but why would anyone just assume that these are instructions and what's on the disc are representations? What you might equally assume that the recording of Blind Willie Johnson is an instruction set for something. So perhaps the aliens, if they had managed to play it, would have wondered, what that is an additional instruction or manual for, as opposed to art. I mean, would they even necessarily have the construct of art? Would they even have the construct of this type of instruction manual? Would they not rather see these concentric circles that are supposed to represent the recording disc as being some kind of a solar orbit? I would. I mean, given that it's a communication from outer space, it seems to me like there are very few contextual clues around which this idea gets organized. But in any case, I think there's sufficient rationale to conclude that that whatever, I mean, the other thing that's really interesting about the language of representation is, insofar as representation is concerned, if one is going to represent human figures with a line drawing, it would seem that the first issue would be to get the figures as anatomically correct as possible to represent us. In other words, if these aliens could even conceive of representation in the same way that we could, and recognize in any form or manner the idea of representationality as material and physical imitation as opposed to abstraction, why would one intentionally abstract the figures beyond the point of making them sexually identifiable? So, I mean, just one question, but anyway. But let's take a look at what else was on the recording, because I think it's kind of interesting. Does it even say? Oh, okay, so here's some examples. The contents of the record were selected for NASA. So we're back at NASA, so I think this particular space-time travel coordinate is of some significance. The contents of the record were selected for NASA, so not by NASA, by a committee chaired by Carl Sagan. Now, it would have been nice if Carl Sagan would have examined the premise of the idea, but I guess that failed to reach their imagination. So no one could have believed that aliens would have developed this technology of phonograph records, right? So Carl Sagan's a smart guy. This is a game that he's playing. No one really imagines that extraterrestrial life is going to find these records and be able to translate them into anything usable, via a phonograph recording. So it's a statement. It's a statement by Carl Sagan of Cornell University about what's valuable in Earth culture, right? And this is a very different way of conceiving of culture than we'd ever really conceived of before. You have to posit the notion of extraterrestrial life, or this non-Earth life, to really think in these global terms and globalize this idea of human identity, across national boundaries. So this, in some ways, even though I've been arguing that these ideas of space travel and other notions of exploring the galaxy and colonizing the galaxy grow out of these ideologies of the age of discovery, or if you alternately call it the age of exploration. But Sagan is doing something different here, because the age of discovery and exploration depended on this notion of national and colonialist identity to claim land. So you had to have a flag, and that's symbolic, but it plays out in very literal ways. You have to have a flag, it represents your nation. You have to have a sense of the alien other that is a native inhabitant of the land that you're about to steal as being profoundly different. He has to belong to this hierarchy of humanity that was expressed in the Bach, right? That he should be deferring to you, or she should be deferring to you, because this apparatus exists and it's the order of the universe, and your flag says that you have ownership rights over this material, just like Warner Brothers has ownership rights over the material that Jimi Hendrix played at Woodstock. Not only the Star-Spangled Banner, but the rest of the material as well, right? Okay, so this idea is a little different, right? It imagines earthly community, and look at this. Okay, the selection of content for, I have to go back, I can't read it yet. The record took almost a year. Sagan and his associates assembled 115 images and a variety of natural sounds, such as those made by surf, wind, thunder, and animals. So this culture of ours, it is really beyond culture, because it includes natural elements, the sounds of this world, and the songs of birds and whales, so non-human elements as well. To this, they added audio content to represent humanity. So it's like our world plus humanity. Spoken greetings in 55 ancient and modern languages. So that this idea of our world also includes time, history, 55 ancient and modern languages, including a spoken greeting in English by UN Secretary Kurt Waldheim, and greeting by Sagan's 6-year-old son. So the personalized Nick, other human sounds like footsteps and laughter, the inspirational message per aspera ad astra in Morse code, and again, paying tribute to these different forms of language and things. But no one could imagine that Morse code. Now, if you did it in binary, maybe there was like more justification for the idea that a binary code like could exist across the consciousnesses beyond the human, but Morse, no, I don't think so. The musical selections from different cultures and eras. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't say what those are, but I remember at least, and it bears upon my own particular context and my own particular interests. I know that one of these selections from different cultures and eras is a recording of the Dene Night Chant. Oh, here's a more expensive list. The music selection is also varied, featuring works by composers such as Johann Sebastian Bach. Well, we know which of his works is presented on this disc, right? It's the Brandenburg Concerto, interpreted by Glenn Gould, and then Mozart, Beethoven. So a lot of European composers, including Stravinsky, and then some folk music and pop music here. Blind Willie Johnson. This area includes music from a number of different nations and cultures. Johnny B. Good. Interesting. So the focus still is largely Eurocentric, and but it explores other areas as well, and it isn't limited to ideas that over hierarchize, right? Musics like Bach. There's this classicist and classical notion of music in the Baroque period and the composers, that grow out of that period as somehow higher art than folk music, music of the people, or music of the masses, pop music, right? Popular culture, folk culture. But here there's an exploration of all of these different realms. So you'll recall that in talking about the function and the telos of these space-time travel machines that I'm designing, and these space-time travel experiments that I perform, that I've talked about the purpose as I've given some background in what types of purpose travel can provide, and I mentioned that the first experiment that I designed, in that experiment, the function of travel was recreational, and that the form of that recreation was the voyage, the trip, the vacation, so that it belongs to this construction of leisure space, and a leisure space that whose historical design, itself, that leisure is an invention of human consciousness in the way that other things are, results from the idea that not that there are kinds of work, sacred and profane, but from the evolution of the idea that that work is essentially a function of all of those things that human beings require to live socially amongst one another, and to sustain their lives, and that leisure represents this period of rest or intervals between periods of work. So, as a counterexample, there was probably once in the evolution of human consciousness a period in which everything was basically conceived of as work, and you would work in farming, to produce a crop, but then you would also work by performing certain rituals that would, sustain the grace of spirits or beings responsible for the life force that generated and produced those crops, and that would be a different kind of labor, and that rest. It wasn't that people didn't recognize that they needed periods of sleep or intervals between the labor, but it wasn't seen in the same way that we would recognize leisure or game playing today. That came later, and you're certainly already there by the time that you get to Rome. And the weird sorts of games that they played, but even those games, like the games of the Colosseum and the killing of slaves and the enjoyment of watching the exploitation and murder of gladiators and other sacrificial victims, probably grew out of the historical development of ideas of sacrifice that were once related, right, to notions of one's relationship to the other world of spirits and of these divine entities, and so that if they did in fact grow out of performances in theaters of sacrifice, that they were once also considered work, because this was the work that you performed on behalf of human beings for the god. In any case, this space-time travel device, or this travel device, space travel device that I invented in 1978, and in the form of this advertisement, belonged to this realm of leisure, and in that way is very different from the kinds of space-time travel machines that I design today. But travel needn't be a voyage of leisure activity, of a vacation, and certainly like the ideas of the Age of Discovery were about making travel and the discovery, right, in quotation marks, of these places outside of Europe and outside of the known, again in quotation marks, world. It was about making these discoveries on behalf of work, on behalf of especially trade, right, but other forms of work as well, including like the territorializing of these domains of space, and so like taking. So trade was largely conceived of in terms of what resources could be exploited, including human resources, including slavery, and then other aspects of the economic use of travel as exploration, was seen in terms of what domains could be inhabited, or populated by the nation that one was producing the exploration for, right? So it involved claiming this territory, which is another form of theft. And all of that, I'm going to argue, depended upon ideas, not limited to, but like the idea of this, great chain of being, this idea of a hierarchy of human beings, and the justification for these explorations were seen in terms of those types of hierarchies and those kinds of thinking. And we see it, like as I mentioned before, in the way that Donald Trump and individuals like that belong to these classes of human thinking that have remained sedentary and in the stagnation of white supremacy and these sorts of colonialist values. So the other model for travel, is simply this: exploration. And exploration has, embedded in it like a justification, that involves both aspects of property that I had just mentioned, territorializing, so claiming, the space, claiming the land, stealing the land, and also, stealing the goods, including human beings conceived that way because they could be conceived that way because of the development of these ideologies that allowed them to serve these functions of trade and capital. So the first thing I just want to do is point to the fact that exploration, this particular justification for travel, was always already, both orientalizing in the sense of Edward Said, and always already colonialist. It was never, whatever NASA wants to pretend, and we're moving toward a comparison of the age of discovery with the justifications that NASA makes. Whatever NASA wants to pretend about discovery, pure and simple, exploration was never merely about discovering our world. It was always about exploiting our world, and hence it was always about colonialism, and hence it was always about Orientalism, and hence it was always about trade, and hence it was always an aspect of supporting an economy that was, moving toward a broader and broader and more complex imperializing capitalism. So these these kinds of understandings are particularly important today, because any time a politician or a demagogue or someone from the right-wing media challenges and insults progressive pedagogies, such as critical race theory, they're always already denying this history of exploration as exploitation. This history of what kinds of racial ideologies were necessary for periods such as the Age of Discovery to manifest themselves. What was necessary to gain access to the resources that someone like Christopher Columbus required to make the discovery, right, was a promise that goods could be exploited. And the promise that goods could be exploited was already a definition of a hierarchy of humanity, because it was assumed that if one brought the proper flag and had the proper number of soldiers and the proper use of force, justified, both by the religion and this idea that there was a moral superiority in terms of the cultural values that a particular religion, lent itself to a human being, and also this innate notion, or this notion of innate, right, hierarchy of human beings that again was informed by a religious model, the great chain of being and the hierarchy of God and the angels and human beings and animals and all of this, but that had elaborated itself into economic territories as well, and was used largely as a justification for notions that human beings could become capital and could become elements of this system of colonial trade. So just quickly framing that argument. Oh yes, I wanted to play some music in the background while I did that, so I'll think about what music. Let me see. Oh, well, here's a picture from under the Wikipedia header exploration. Professor G.A. Wallen, 1811 through 1852. Already really beyond our period that we're going to investigate, the age of discovery. A Finnish explorer and Orientalist. So I'm claiming that exploration is in and of itself always already Orientalizing, right? Who was remembered for his journeys to the Middle East during the 1940s. So exploration, and look at him, he's Finnish. Interesting. He doesn't look particularly Finnish to me. All right, so thinking about the connections between exploration and space-time travel, NASA, and then maybe going back to that initial phrase derived from the quantum mechanic. The birds are quick to leave Hamburg in winter. I think I'll play this. Because why do they leave Hamburg in winter? Why are they quick to leave Hamburg? Because, presumably, because it's cold. So we'll play this one. Because it's also cold on Mars.
0 hour, 9 a.m.
All right. So this is the Age of Discovery page, and the only argument that I want to make here is that discovery was always already inherently encapsulated by the understanding that it was a project of the trade and acquisition of territory. So there's all of this, there's all of this, there's all of this. Let's see if there's any recognition of this. Okay, so European overseas exploration led to the rise of global trade. Now, I would actually take issue with that, and for the reason that I've already stated. European overseas exploration did not lead to the rise of global trade. It began as a project explicitly marking that domain out. In other words, no matter who it was, no matter whether it was Sir Walter Raleigh or Christopher Columbus or anyone else, no exploratory adventure, to the so-called New World would ever have been financed by a state, a government, a queen, or a king if there hadn't been some justification for the cost of such a venture. And it's like the cost of those kinds of explorations, we have to understand would have been, by today's standards, like similar to what NASA spends on a project, involving, putting human beings on Mars. So extraordinary cost. So these costs have to be justified. So it's not like there were these individuals out there that were interested in discovery, and they had this mindset, that they wanted to acquire knowledge about the world, and then it became useful to think about these domains as possibly inhabitable, possibly territorializing, possibly sources of trade and of income for their nations. No, it was the opposite. That they had already been imagined as such, and that was the justification from the very outset of acquiring the funding to make these journeys. So they were always. This is in a way putting the cart, before the horse. European overseas exploration was made possible, by notions of the potentiality of global trade, based upon the acquisition of goods and territory from these places that didn't belong to the nations. And so an investment was made in the exploration of these areas, right? And then it does talk about the kinds of trade, a wide transfer of plants, animals, food, and human populations. And so this is where, these ideas of white supremacy and great chain of being, or other ideas of human authority and rights, this is why these racializations of humanity become necessary, because it wouldn't be possible, right? Just like it wasn't possible in Greece and Rome to justify slavery unless one could justify either a hierarchy of value among human beings, or by laying some blame. And these racial ideologies tend to use combinations. They're poor because they're lazy. So that's blame, right? Or you can see that they're less than us because for Trump, again, the fact that he has money is enough to justify his idea of superiority, right? So anything that is recognized as something that we value is justification. Anything that falls outside of our perception of being valuable as a cultural commodity is justification for the assignment of this different status upon the human being, right? So tend to be a combination of those things. So I just wanted to demonstrate, without talking too much about history, talking too much about who the proponents of these ideological ideas were, but even simply in a brief demonstration of the history of this period of colonization and these ideas of discovery, that it had begun with an idea of economy in mind, and the very possibility of discovery was made because of the availability of economic resources that were informed by the politics and ideology of the argument for an expansive trade. And this was the very same idea with the spice route and the trade. The trade paths opened up into Asia, were the very same as those opened up into the quote unquote Americas or New World, right? Very same idea. So, here's NASA again, and the astronaut, there's his flag, so not only on the suit, but also there are a number of iconic images that show astronauts planting American flags on the moon, obviously like paying homage to this form of this particular form of discovery, you could say the new age of discovery, or this form of colonialism in which flags played such an important role. And then another justification for why we explore. And so this is interesting. So on this site, the word explore is used. So travel clearly is seen in terms of its alignment with this particular semantic or semiotic vector, exploration, as opposed to leisure, vacation, right? No, although some of the wealthier among us now like the idea of taking vacations or going on these journeys, these safaris, you could say, in a way, right, to Mars or the moon. But here, a brief statement of the justification. Humanity's interest, so it does say humanity, not the United States, in the heavens has been universal and enduring. Well, but not necessarily in this way, right? But that's misleading. Universal and enduring, but not in this way, not in terms of exploration. So to say that exploration is universal and enduring is already skewing, why humans were once interested in the heavens, because they were once interested in the heavens for many different reasons, and it wasn't until very late, that human beings, began to utilize the stars as means of navigating. Late in terms of the standards that we have for understanding the longevity of humanity, right? Perhaps not late as civilization goes, but late in the history of human beings. Humans are driven to explore the unknown, discover new worlds. It's very Star Trek driven here. Discover new worlds, push the boundaries of our scientific and technical limits, and then push further. Now, one of the things I want to call attention to is the way that the idea of exploitation of resources and of human beings is downplayed, and the way that discovery is sort of like extricated from this. And this is the way that like white supremacy works. It like extricates these ideals like patriotism, it extricates ideals like knowledge, it extricates ideals like classical civilization, and then it leaves like the unsavory history behind. Like it doesn't tell you that in order to have this idea that you have to have this notion that animals and resources and human beings are all essentially exploitable materials in the service of the technological and scientific exploration of capitalist venture. So it doesn't tell you that. It tells you about it heroizes in a certain way. This is the heroization. This is Odysseus as not returning home, but like still venturing further, so maybe not Odysseus so much as the Argonauts, right? Like exploring and like looking for that golden fleece, like that becomes the reward of the adventure among the barbarians. The intangible desire to explore and challenge the boundaries of what we know, and where we have been, and where we have been has provided benefits to our society for centuries. Now, I want to clarify, again, I'm not inherently against discovery, and this is one of the issues that I want to make, that I am also using space-time travel devices as a means of exploring and as a means of discovering. But I want to be clear that when I explore and I discover the world, I want to separate that from these domains of exploitation and trade and benefit. And to do that is not always easy. There's always somebody asking you to steal and sell what you've stolen. Whether that's in the form of the museum space or a journey somewhere or something else. And to truly, learn, and to truly see with one's own eyes and body and experience without exploiting can sometimes be difficult when the rules for seeing and exploring and learning and discovering are already always embedded in these structures. And so that's something to keep in mind. Like, can we have a kind of travel that is exploratory, that is a discovery, without being part of an apparatus of trade, an apparatus of property relations authorized by notions of capital and other human systems that are designed to exploit both the things of this world and the human beings that are required to manipulate those things. So anyway, human space exploration helps to address fundamental questions about our place in the universe and the history of our solar system. So this abstracted sense, right? And to me, this idea still works, right? But it's not what gets you resources to do the exploration, and NASA's well aware of it. Human space exploration helps to address fundamental questions about our place in the universe and the history of the solar system. This is Galileo, this is Galileo. This is maybe not Newton. Newton was involved in some other projects as well, and maybe not even Galileo, who was. We're always embedded in the ideologies of our period. But in the purest, most abstract sense, knowledge, because we're part of the universe, there's nothing wrong with learning about the universe, and perhaps some of the ways that we can learn about the universe are by leaving the planet and by exploring it in different ways. But NASA's never going to get any money from the U.S. government or whatever is the equivalent of the Russian space program or Chinese space program is never going to get any money from any of their national governments by explaining that space exploration addresses fundamental questions about the universe and the history of our solar system. There always has to be some practical application, right? It's like those students that go to school and they complain about math and they say, well, how am I going to use this in my life? And really what they mean is not how am I going to use it in my life, but how is it going to make me money, right? How is it going to profit me? And this is the nature of our world. So if it doesn't profit us, then we don't care. We don't really care in this Platonic way about knowledge, or this that there's purpose in knowing because we're part of the universe. Why wouldn't we want to know about the universe of which we're a part? And whether you're Attila Grandpierre or I don't know what's the guy's name, Tyson, I can't remember, but anyway, that idea, whether you're a mystic in search of a higher truth about human knowledge, or whether you're more an Aristotelian scientific devotee of the facts as opposed to the unknown, that idea has value, and but it's not going to get you anywhere in terms of your resources. So that's the closest thing to the truth that this brief statement comes, right? Through addressing the challenge related to human space exploration, we expand technology. Okay, so here's the part This is the part that really addresses the government here and the acquisition of resources and the justification, to the American citizens who want to know where their tax dollars are going. Create new industries. Okay, so whatever that means, I mean, like, in a way, it's obvious. If you give us money, you're creating a new industry. Well, if you give anything money, you're creating an industry, right? You have to do something with that money, right? So whether it's, they could be designing little plastic toys, they could be, digging holes in the ground. They would create an industry for digging holes in the ground, But anyway, that's the justification there. Create new industries, okay, and help to foster a peaceful connection with other nations. That's arguable, and you'd have to demonstrate that. I can imagine, that the idea makes a kind of sense, but I think it's difficult, like, to point to any examples that are long lasting, especially in terms of, like, the nations that actually have engaged in cooperative ventures in space, and the large space industry nations, right? So large space industry nations are, the former Soviet Union, Russia, and China and the United States. And I don't see that there's a more peaceful connection between those nations and any other nations in the human universe. So that's an arguable point. Curiosity and exploration are vital to the human spirit, and accepting the challenge of going deeper into space will invite the citizens of the world today and the generations of tomorrow to join us on this exciting journey. Well, that's just empty blather. And then down here, I want to skip to the chase. There's a suggestion here, right? NASA, I'm going to skip to the second paragraph. NASA will use the International Space Station as test bed and stepping stone for the challenging journey ahead. Well, what is this journey? By building upon what we learned there, we will prepare astronauts for the challenges of long-duration flight and the permanent expansion of human exploration beyond where we have been before. Well, why? Explorers may visit near-Earth asteroids where we can get answers to the questions humans have always asked. Visiting an asteroid will provide valuable mission experience and prepare us for the next steps, possibly for the first humans to step on Mars. It doesn't quite say it, but it hints, right? It hints at colonization. It hints at the colonization of extraterrestrial space, and in hinting at it, it firmly locates itself in an aspect of the economics of the age of discovery. All right. Stepping stone for going further into the solar system. Why translunar space? All right, now, why does it hint at it? I have suggested, right, that when Carl Sagan came up with his list of items that should be included on recording that was sent into outer space as an example of humanity and of the conditions on Earth, that this was a statement, not in any way a practical type of communication that one could imagine having with extraterrestrial life. No one with any sense would imagine that if there were extraterrestrials, they would have developed exactly the kind of technology necessary to reproduce the recording on this curious technological apparatus, the record. So there were only two possibilities. Imagining like this extraterrestrial life so much more advanced than human beings that whatever they discovered, they could create a system for uncoding, or that there was no belief that these could ever be a form of communication, but was merely a kind of statement. And I would argue that the same thing is going on in a kind of sly way with the NASA project. Because there's no way that anyone with any intelligence could imagine that space exploration, and that it would be easier to transform a hostile environment like Mars into an inhabitable human domain than it would be to save the rainforests on Earth. There's no way. So essentially, particularly now with the development of all of these innovations in solar technology and energy technology, we already have on this Earth, everything that is required to produce all of the energy and the resources that we need. The only thing that's getting in the way is capital, is the industries that want to exploit, natural, we say in quotation marks, resources that we no longer need to exploit, like gas and coal, in lieu of developing further the technologies required to use non-expendable resources, right? Like wind and solar power, to sustain sustainable resources to sustain the lives of human beings. And then even when that is done, capital gets in the way, because electrical companies, these utility companies, that even today, if one owns one's own solar panel, right? SDG&E, for example, San Diego Gas and Electric, still manages to profit from one's ownership of not only like the energy that's required to sustain one's own property, but the energy that goes back, via the grid to them. So you even if you're producing twice as much solar power, capital finds a way of making you pay for it, even though they're profiting not only on the power that you're giving them, but the profiting on the contract that you have, like, to stay on the grid. And the only reason that you would require that is either because you're already on the grid before you put in the solar power, and it's hard to get their stuff off your land, or whatever, or there's a reason that you can't store all the batteries required to use the electricity that you generate with your solar unit as you need it. But in any case, these are the reasons why there's a justification for destroying the earth. And in what way will these justifications cease to exist simply because you're looking at a different resource, simply because the resource changes from the resources of the earth, from the sun's power to whatever the land is on Mars? They won't. So you haven't solved anything. You've only created a more difficult problem for yourself. You changed the problem. So the problem before was how can we sustain our existence here on Earth without exploiting all the resources that are limited, and we already have the answer to that problem. The only thing that is in the way is man's desire to exploit those resources for profit. So if you want to change that, then you've already solved the problem. But you can't say that you're going to change the profit motive by territorializing Mars or the moon or some distant planet. So you haven't really escaped the problem, have you? You've created this straw man argument, or this this distraction, and the inevitability of the destruction of the earth, which people like Greta Thunberg have been arguing against and providing models for continuing our life here on this planet that are certainly reasonable, right? It's just this kind of like capitalist pessimism that allows that NASA to exploit these old models of colonialism and associate them with discovery and hint at them, right, more than just say them outright, because no one wants to be called on the ridiculousness of their argument. Like you said to one of these scientists, like, you're telling me that it's going to be easier to convert Mars into a sustainable human environment than it is just to stop mining coal and oil and turning it into a product that that destroys the earth. They would say no, but we can't change that. The argument, though, needs to go a step further. You can't change the way that capital will exploit Mars either, right? So you've accomplished absolutely nothing. So that in the backdrop, I want to return to the piece that we were looking at with I want to return to the piece that Jimi Hendrix performed, the Star-Spangled Banner, at Woodstock, and I want to talk about that piece in terms of the way that it was regarded in his time, and the way that it represented a radical challenge to the consciousness of what it meant to be a patriot and an American, and to the way that the understanding of the complexities and the enormity of the significance of the social experience of history played a role in defining individuals and constructs, both in his time and continue to do so in our time. And as I've mentioned before, the issues are still with us, because there are still those arguing that what it is to respect or disrespect the flag. But as I've said, right-wing ideologues didn't get upset at Roseanne Barr's sarcastic presentation of the Star-Spangled Banner, at least not in the way that they decry and object to the way that someone like Colin Kaepernick or LeBron James respectfully kneels and prays for human dignity and for an end to exploitation and murder. While the national anthem is being sung or spoken. So I want to return to that piece that Jimi performed and Hendrix performed in his, and especially the way that it's interpreted. And I want to look at what remains of an interview, representation of his thought on the Dick Cavett show. Following Woodstock, and some of the ways in which what I interpret to be the profound social implications of that performance are sort of ignored and denied or transformed by this interview. And to talk about that moment as a kind of expansive conscious awareness, that may have had consequences beyond many individuals, surface awareness, including what comes across on the interview with Dick Cavett.
How are you? I'm pretty tired. It's been recording so much. You're tired now? Yeah, I've been on a speaking all night. I've been working on an STTAT. How much sleep do you need to be alert? I guess about 8 hours. Yeah, I had about 8 minutes, so, 8 minutes. I slept longer than that in my monologue. Want to cut the racket off on the sound here? Nice gentleman. What is that sound that we hear irritating us so dreadfully? Well, it sounds like the New York Street. I don't know, it's like today the air is all static, so the amplifiers are static. Music is loud, the air is loud. We're trying to settle things down. But it's going to take like a rest. I asked a practical question and got a philosophical answer. I was thinking it was philosophical. I thought it was. This is George. Yeah, what else is trying to get a point across?
Okay, so I'm going to halt there, and because at that moment when Dick Cavett says, I asked a practical question and got a philosophical answer, I want to demonstrate, or at least attempt to argue that that he's transforming what Hendrix is talking about from a social political discourse into this very abstracted discourse in which ideas of race and the globalism of American imperialism, are being transformed into manipulatable concepts that fall into domains that are depoliticized, right? So rather than saying that I asked you a question about a buzz that is a technological outlay, or a technological consequence of the material apparatus of our recording here, and you responded with a social commentary or an analogy. You provided a metaphorical explanation of the way that our society is producing violence as a form of noise and distraction, and he sanitizes it. And one of the rationales for sanitizing these kinds of discourses is the same rationale that the age of discovery and that NASA have for removing all of those requirements of how do we get resources, how do we trade. The moral implications of seeing human beings but not just human beings, also what belong to other human beings as your property right, or Mars as potentially ours, planting a flag on the moon because why? It belongs to us because we discovered it, right? Whether it was staged or whether it was improvised or what, it doesn't much matter. What matters is the ideology and the symbolic importance of being able to place this flag on something that clearly, like, not only doesn't belong to the United States, but doesn't belong in a certain respect to the inhabitants of the earth. So even if there were aliens, or weren't, we wouldn't necessarily, have that right. But the right, comes out of the ideological apparatus that designs it. And part of that design is abstracting and removing, so reorganizing collections of ideas and of thoughts and of sanitizing them in the process of reorganizing them and recollecting them. So let's go back and watch it happen again.
It's like today the air is all static, so the amplifier is static. Music is loud, the air is loud. We're trying to settle things down a little bit. But it's going to take a rest. I asked a practical question and got a philosophical answer. It's like that's philosophical? I thought it was just George here today.
Okay, so Hendrix is very nice about it, but you can hear in his voice that he's poking fun. He's feigning, right? You can see that he's feigning, and is that philosophical? And part of it is, you could say, oh well, he's feigning that he didn't know that it was philosophical, that it was merely a literal thing, right? Not a metaphor. But no, the fact is, and you can see it a little bit in the expression on Dick Cavett's face. Hendrix is correcting him, all right? He's correcting the white man who doesn't, like, whether he's aware of it or not, doesn't enjoy being corrected by a person of color. You can see it on his face. But he's correcting him in this. This is not really philosophical. Is it philosophical? Why did you see the need to call it philosophical as opposed to political? Why can't you recognize it for what it is? And Hendrix, this happens, I think, a lot. This happens a lot in culture's ability to navigate this space of the political artist or the critical artist, particularly the political and critical artist who is not seen as having the same status or belonging to the same set of identifying privileges, that is, these positionalities of privilege, right? So it's a bit different if you're Mitch McConnell. He says that he can speak for all of Americans, but if someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speaks, she's not allowed to speak for Americans in general, right? Or even Kamala Harris isn't allowed to speak for Americans because of her positionality as a woman, her positionality as a person of color, whereas Mitch McConnell gets away with saying, like, Americans don't need this, and it's clear, we know what he means. He means white Americans, but the reason that he can say it and the reasons that he can universalize that position is because the assumption is there that American subject, behind whatever it's marked by, represents what Dick Cavett represents right here, this white male privilege. And so Hendrix is very subtle, and he's very clever, and he knows both how to use language and how to use noise and how to use quiet. So I'll do it again, and want to sort of focus on that moment when he says, "Is it philosophical?" There are a lot of different ways to read it.
What is that sound that we hear irritating us so dreadfully? Well, it sounds like the New York Street. I don't know, it's like today the air is all static, so the amplifiers are static. Music is loud, the air is loud. We're trying to settle things down. But it's going to take like a rest. I asked a practical question and got a philosophical answer. Philosophical? I thought it was just a Jewish here. Yeah, well, I was just trying to get a point across before take our rest. I'm sorry, Stuart. We're gonna both sack out. Mr. Young, will you, let me ask you a thing. What really happened to you that night at Woodstock? Did you stay on so long you just really were? I was playing in the morning, and it was announced that it was canceled. The show at the Concertos was canceled, so. And then later on it was announced that it was on. Oh, really? No. And what was happening? It was so exhausting. Yeah. It was like a, what do you call those things? Nervous breakdown or whatever. Physical breakdown. You don't suppose it was a real internet. Have you ever had nervous breakdown? Yeah, like 3 of them since I've been in this business. Really? I didn't mean to drop.
Okay, so there's another interesting thing. When Hendrix says, I had about 3 of them since I've been in this business, and then Dick Cavett, feigns concern or whatever it is. Really, I didn't mean to pry, like it's a private issue. But Hendrix had clearly made it a social issue. He didn't say because I had these traumatic events in my childhood. He didn't say because I had a difficulty with a drug problem. He didn't say because I can't handle this and this and this. He said that he made a social comment about this business, right? And what is this business? Well, this is the business of Warner Brothers stealing your material and not paying your not paying the rewards that your contract says that you deserve. This is the business in which if you're a white British museum. That was an interesting Freudian slip. If you're a white British museum, you can steal the treasures of King Tut. But if you're a white British museum, you can also steal the cultural treasure. You can also steal the cultural resources. You can also steal the cultural forms and values of African American folk and blues music. And not give credit to Blind Willie Johnson or Willie Dixon or Howlin' Wolf or Robert Johnson on your record, on your vinyl, right? Your vinyl record label, and so this is the business, and this is what Hendrix is talking about. You have to read between the lines, and Dick Cavett may or may not be able to do that. But he's talking about Eric Clapton, and he's talking about the Rolling Stones, and he's talking about like the history of theft, and he's talking about the way that he's responded to that theft by like re-recording white musicians' music, and he's talking about the way that he's been received, and he's talking about contracts, and he's talking about when he moved away from the way that his work was packaged when he was part of the he's talking about when he moved away from the way that his work was packaged and presented for radio, run by the establishment in the United States and across Europe, that there was resistance both on the part of labels and on the part of producers to continuously engage, continue to engage his work, and that when his work developed into more social political areas, that it was difficult for him to maintain the same kind of structural apparatus in terms of his touring and record producing. So all of this is going on, and I'm not saying that Cavett is aware of it and necessarily subverting it or attempting to entirely silence it, but he clearly is erasing. He's erasing the social significance and the political significance of Hendrix, and he's providing it, he's transforming it into this. He's very much like, either unaware or doesn't see the necessity of critical race theory, right? Because he's not part of the struggle, right? And so it's interesting to watch. Let's go back and watch it again.
Was cancelled, the show at the Concertos was cancelled, so and then later on it was announced that it was on. Oh really? I didn't know what was happening. I was so exhausted. Yeah. It was like a, what do you call those things? Nervous breakdown. Physical breakdown. Because it was a real internet. Have you ever had nervous breakdown? I have like 3 of them since I've been in this school. Since I've been in this business, really? I didn't mean to cry, but since you brought it up, I yeah. They said that everyone was amazed at the absence of violence. It's become a cliche now about that big festival and about the others. Were you surprised at it? You think that I was glad? That's what it's all about. Try to keep violence down, keep them off the streets. And like the festival, 500,000 people was a very beautiful turnout. I hope we have more of them, What was the controversy about the national anthem and the way? I don't know. All I do is play it. I'm American, so I used to sing in school, but maybe sing in school, so it's a flashback.
All right, just to hold it right there, like some very interesting things. Like I played it, I'm an American. Like obviously that doesn't occur to everybody, right? So LeBron James, like kneeling at the national anthem. Yeah, why? Well, I'm an American, and this means something to me. And what it means to me is of such grave importance that I can kneel and have these feelings, and also recognize my feelings toward my fellow Americans who are being killed. And this should be a moment that, like, we understand that in this singing of this song and all of these values and virtues that are extolled in this song, right? That this is indeed an ideal moment, like to mourn for the loss of my brother's lives, right? So in what way, shape, or form could that possibly be disrespectful? And Hendrix, is recognizing the very, very same thing, right? So he played taps, and it's a mourning song. It's a mourning for all those individuals who died in Vietnam, and also questioning, this unchallenged association of patriotism with this kind of imperialistic, nationalism. Like, why that alignment? And he's very much aware of the way that he's informing the playing of this embodiment of who he is, an American, with the sound of the times and the noise and the way that his performance of this, like he said earlier in his discussion, is a challenge to the violence, not an incitation of violence. It's a challenge to violence, not an incitation of violence, right? And then, the added thing, like which resonates, for those of us who understand, the history of the way that people have been, particularly African Americans and particularly Native Americans, but the way in which certain elements of American society have been forced to repeat or indoctrinated in these mandatory ways, into certain things, not speak one's own language, but reiterate, this language of the master. So I had to do it in school. They made me do it in school. Like you're forced, right? Just like the way that Native American children were taken from their parents and indoctrinated and not allowed to speak their native language and not allowed to have their own culture, but were forced to adopt whatever this was, whether it was, mission style Christianity or whether it was, certain allegiances to the flag and this kind of like violent nationalism and warfare that many people were very much indoctrinated into and certainly like deserve like to be recognized for their heroism and whatever, and Hendrix was a soldier himself, but also like deserve to have this thing as their property and to do with it what they will, in the same way that the blues should be recognized as an American property as well then, right? So what was stolen over the course of time and via the age of discovery is still being stolen, right? So I mean the connection between the theft of these African American blues songwriters and musicians and the theft of all of these trinkets in the British Museum, should not be neglected in our minds and histories, and understandings of the world. Excuse me, too much coffee. And so this is also part of the space-time travel discussion and criticality as discovery, discovering these connections and allowing them to become part of the way that we change and challenge the world. And so when we hear someone say, "Oh, critical race theory, la 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 la," we understand exactly where they're coming from and we understand what it means, right? We don't say, "Oh yeah, we don't need that," but we understand how, in fact, this is the way that people are silenced, right? This is the way that these ideas that like you're hardly allowed to speak in the first place, but if you can find a way of speaking through, the way that you play the Star Spangled Banner, then you're silenced further after that. So once again, we'll go back and take a look at
What was the controversy about the national anthem and the way? I don't know. All I did was play it on American, so I sort of sang in school, but maybe sing in school, so it's like, well, I should have, I don't know what to call it. This man was in the 101st Airborne, so when you write your nasty letters in, talk to goodness, already. Well, when you mention the national anthem and talk about playing it in any unorthodox way, you immediately get a guaranteed percentage of hate mail. People say, how is that unorthodox?
All right, so just stop again. It's the same. The word unorthodox. It's the same exact maneuver that Cavett makes when he says, I asked a practical question and I got a philosophical answer. So he says unorthodox as opposed to political, right? Okay, there's no way that anybody that has really listened to the way that Hendrix plays the Star-Spangled Banner and the elements of the piece, including taps, and his further elaboration of what noise and distortion means in terms of the American social political context, there is no way that anyone that has actually paid attention, even in the slightest way, to all of those things would not understand that this is social commentary. Absolutely none whatsoever. So unorthodox is, again, this hygienic, sanitized term that extracts. This is why we do need Mitch, and people like Stephen King or the other white supremacist racists in the government and the ideologues on Fox News and whatever. Hey, I'm waving my hand here. This is precisely, they won't listen, obviously, they're incapable of it. But this is precisely why we need critical race theory, to understand how this voice of an activist political artist, which Hendrix always was, but who emerged more and more into a sophisticated messenger of these particular struggles, to the American and international public. More and more he became. And the way that he became this, in spite of the fact that it raised all of these discomforts and problems for people like Cavett, who just want to get through with this show, and Cavett's not the worst of them, right? I mean, he's at least willing to have Jimi Hendrix on, But there was always a recognition of the talent, of the innovation, of the technical ability, of the genius in a certain way. But there was never really a recognition of the content. And part of this space-time travel exploration is, at least as I see it, is to show why, and to demonstrate why, why it's still an issue and of great value and significance to today, and how in our 4th of July celebrations, we really should be doing space-time travel explorations of events like Hendrix playing of the Star-Spangled Banner, and how those kind of explorations are much more significant, relevant, and important to who we are and how we can change the world than it is to light fireworks or barbecue hamburgers and things like that. Let's go look at it again.
They said that everyone was amazed at the absence of violence. It's become a cliche now, like that big festival and about the others. Were you surprised at it? Do you think that most glad? That's what it's all about. Try to keep violence down, keep them off the streets. And like a festival, 500,000 people was a very beautiful turnout. All we have more, What was the controversy about the national anthem? All I do is play it. I'm American, so I used to sing in school. They made me sing in school, so it's like, well, I should have it. I love the book. This man was in the 101st Airborne, so when you write your nasty letters in, talk to others. When you mention the national anthem and talk about playing it in any unorthodox way, you immediately get a guaranteed percentage of hate mail. People will say, how is that unorthodox? It's not unorthodox. It isn't unorthodox. I thought it was beautiful. Well, there you go. Don't you find that there's a certain mad beauty in an orthodoxy? I knew you'd do that someday if you would wake up.
All right, just so once again, like Cavett, like totally missing the point, you know, missing the reference to black is beautiful, missing the peace sign, you know, missing the other gesture that Hendrix performs, and trying to make a joke out of it all. Mad, like so he almost like comes back to this idea of the nervous breakdown, mad beauty. Like Hendrix is just out there, wacko, la 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 la, and again fails to recognize like why Hendrix has to perform this way, has to make light of certain, you know, things, has to like perform this little gesture, has to come back to the comedy. And it's precisely because like of all the discomfort. Like Cavett is the one that's uncomfortable, right? Clearly, and Hendrix is consistently throughout the interview, like doing the best he can, like to ease his anxieties in different ways, you know, through humor, subtlety, you know, these indirect references and all of this, and all of it, you know, still involved in Cavett's like inability like to come to terms with what's actually going on in the conversation. If conversations were as banal and ordinary as what Cavett pretends to make of them, they would almost be unnecessary, right? So like he only states things that are comfortable and that everyone already knows or is already part of the discourse, and that really probably isn't what happened anyway. And this is exactly what's going on again and again and again.
School, the man say in school, so it's a flash. This man was in the 101st Airborne, so when you write your nasty letters in, talk to others. When you mention the national anthem and talk about playing it in any unorthodox way, you immediately get a guaranteed percentage of hate mail. People will say, how is that unorthodox? It's not unorthodox. It isn't unorthodox. I thought it was beautiful. Well, there you go.
All right, so what else is happening there? He says whenever you mention the national anthem and talk about it in any unorthodox way, you are guaranteed to get hate mail. Okay, so what does taking race out of the equation get Cavett? So he doesn't have to say, we're going to get hate mail because you're black. He can say, we're going to get hate mail because of the unorthodox way that you played the national anthem. Now, he doesn't have to, I mean, whether it was unorthodox or not, he doesn't attempt to justify its unorthodoxy or, you know, lack of conventionality. He dismisses the content, and in dismissing the content, he allows himself to say that all of the hate mail that they're going to get has to do with like people's perceptions of this being an anti-American gesture. When Hendrix has already said he's an American and he can play it any way he wants because he is an American and because he was forced to sing it when he was a child, and he's as much as an American as anybody else. And yet Cavett is playing into like this idea of the game of abstracting subjectivities, not recognizing that positionalities have a relationship to social power, and so that he can say that he's going to get this hate mail, and it doesn't have anything to do with Hendrix's color, the fact of him being African American, when it has everything to do with it. So let's watch it again.
What really happened to you that night, which stay on so long, you just really remember. I was playing in the morning, and there was announced that it was cancelled, the show at Dick Evans was cancelled, so, and then later on it was announced that it was on. Oh, really? No. You know what's happening? I was so exhausted now. Yeah. It's like a, what do you call those things? Nervous breakdown or whatever. Physical breakdown. You don't suppose it was a real, you ever had nervous breakdown? Yeah, like 3 of them. This is a very school. This is a business. Really? I didn't mean to pry, but since you brought it up, they said that everyone was amazed at the absence of violence. It's become a cliche now about that big festival and about the others. Were you surprised at it? Do you think that? I was glad. That's what it's all about. Yeah. Try to keep violence down, keep it off the streets. And like a festival, 500,000 people wasn't very big of a turnout, Oh, we have more of them, It'd be nice. Yeah. What was the controversy about the national anthem or the way? I don't know. All I did was play it. I'm American, so I played. I sang in school, they made me sing in a school song. It's a flashback, This man was in the 101st Airborne, so when you write your nasty letters in, talk to goodness, when you mention the national anthem and talk about playing it in any unorthodox way, you immediately get a guaranteed percentage of hate mail. People say, how is that unorthodox? It's not unorthodox. It isn't unorthodox. I thought it was beautiful. Well, there you go. Don't you find that there's a certain mad beauty in unorthodoxy? I knew you'd do that someday. Even you got Do they ever send that shirt back with too much starch in the collar? That's the best shirt I ever seen in a long time. Why do the super groups keep breaking up? There are always rumors that your group is breaking up and Big Brother broke up. Well, probably because like they want to get into individual things and then or maybe they might want to get into other things besides music. You mean guys in your group would want out of the business, out of the music business and everything? Well, not necessarily maybe they want to get into their own music, because like what I was trying to do like do today's type of blues, like manic depression and so forth. Like already he's into more harmonic thing, when you sing and so. And like he went to England to get his own group together. Which is? Noel Redding, the bass. Oh, Noel Redding. Yeah. And Billy Cobb's playing bassist too. And I think it's the last job we do until, take a rest. It looks like we've been working very hard for 3 years. Can you tell some nights you're just not making it at all? All you have is to just walk off. And that's like all compliments,
So let me go back to and connect two things that happened in the course of the interview. Hendrix had already made a statement about these alleged nervous breakdowns that he had being a result of the music business. And then he reiterated that notion right here, right, with this idea that Noel Redding, who, if you know anything about the history of the Jimi Hendrix experience, was very upset by the third album. When they arrived in the studio, to do the recording of Electric Ladyland, and they had a new producer for some of the songs, and the songs were much less conventional, and they were written in an entirely different way. They were largely improvisatory, and they were worked out in the studio, which was a completely different way of working than having this material, having worked it out, presented it to the band. And Redding, had a real problem with this, and he wanted these like little packaged songs that could be marketed for radio. And the old producer that they had, and I can't remember anybody's name, but unfortunately, but the old producer that they had was very good at like creating this inventory, this collection of these tunes that were the right length, had the right structure, they were familiar enough to get on a radio in both the United States and abroad, in England and other places in Europe, and they're very marketable, right? And the songs, and I'm referring to songs like Foxy Lady, Purple Haze, which are in some ways practically the same song anyway, but other songs too, in some ways, songs like what was the other one? Oh, Wind Cries Mary, and then the blues song, there's Red House Over Yonder, classic blues, basically just classic blues, right? So familiar, easy to digest, very much like the Beatles, or maybe not the Monkees, who not that easy, not that pop, but the experience was on tour with the Monkees, but more certainly more conventional, certainly more accessible, certainly more. And less socially engaged too, right? Like all of the material on the first record, you could find references to psychedelic culture in them, and you could find references to social political ideas in them. Songs like Purple Haze. But there was a lot of material that was, just like the kind of more conventional. The social connection was relationships between romantic partners, or the breakdown of relationships in this way that could easily be regarded as apolitical. So Hendrix is referring not only to when Cavett says wanting to explore things on your own, and he's thinking about all of these like personal things. Hendrix is very much coming back to this notion of the industry and the way that Redding preferred to work within the industry, and the way that he wanted to work within the industry, developing new kinds of ways of both working and of exploring content. And what's neglected, of course, is the whole discussion of the fact that both Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding were white and had a particular relationship to the culture in the industry that was how to put it, metastable in terms of players, meaning that you could and they were both good at this. You could work over here, and then you move with another unit. Well, Hendrix was exploring ideas that no one, once he really started working, like in Clapton's group or whatever, was suggesting like collaborations with Hendrix, right? So he was exploring different social domains, and the Band of Gypsies, or whatever it was called at the time that he was playing in Woodstock, would eventually become that unit of three individuals with Buddy Miles and Billy Cox and Hendrix. And so this was an African American group, and in that sense it was totally different from what he was doing with the Experience, and he's referencing all of this, and it comes back to the way that Cavett once again had ignored what he said about the breakdown, and then he actually referred to the same sort of semantic or semiotic configuration, right? Like in mentioning manic depression, the song. So go back.
Do they ever send that shirt back with too much starch in the collar? That's the best shirt I've ever seen in a long time. Why do the super groups keep breaking up? They're always rumors that your group is breaking up and Big Brother broke up. Well, probably because like they want to get into individual things and their own, or maybe you might want to get into other things besides music. You mean guys in your group would want out of the business, out of the music business? And not necessarily, maybe they might want to get into their own music. Because like what I was trying to do, like do a today's type of blues, like manic depression and so forth. Like already he's into a more harmonic thing, you know, when you sing and so. And like he went to England to get older together. No musician? No already. Oh, no already. Yeah. He really constantly makes this stuff. I think it's the last job we do until, take a rest. It's like we've been working very hard for 3 years. Can you tell some nights you're just not making it at all? All you are is to just walk off. That's why I hate compliments. Compliments are so embarrassing sometimes because you know really the truth. And sometimes people don't really try to understand. It's like a circus that might come in town. So I'll watch that, and then see if they will, and they go on and feed it on the next thing, But it's alright, it's just part of life. I'm digging myself. You're considered one of the best guitar players in the world. Well, one of the best in this studio. How about one of the best sitting in this chair? Yeah. Do you have to practice every day the way a violinist does? I mean, if you're not working, say you're off in England and you're just taking off, you have to keep shape every day. I like to play to myself and in the room before we go on stage like this. So whenever I feel down, depressed or whatever, I just go and play. And I can't practice those. It's always constantly, what do you call it, like a jam, It's hard for me to remember any notes because I'm constantly trying to create other things. That's why I make a lot of mistakes. Do you read music? No. You ever run into any of the guys from the old 101st? Yeah. See them? Do they wonder if you think your life is strange compared to what they're in? Oh, well, I wouldn't matter really because, there's so many different things going on now, you can't take time out to say, oh, I don't even think about me there at all, and all this kind of stuff, I can't go through all of it. And I've gone through it for 3 years. I think they're pretty well off if they ever get out of that stuff, To see me again, it's for me to see them. I feel very lucky about that. You're still looking for that certain girl? Certain girl? What girl? The certain one. You're not married? No. Do you see yourself married ever? No. But you'll never get a situation comedy on television.